The Edo Tensei is a controversial jutsu in the Naruto series. Many people are completely against bringing people back from the dead in any story, claiming when a character is revived, the narrative loses a lot of stakes because, oh, death doesn't mean much now. But what if I told you that the Naruto series needed even more Edo Tensei summons? Well, let's talk about this in this video, and I'll be explaining why Naruto would have benefited from all angles, financially and narratively, from more Edo Tensei summons. The claim that a story loses its stakes and even believability when somebody's brought back from the dead certainly has a basis. In a story like Naruto, for example, where you have a lot of fights, life or death situations, difficult moments that characters have to go through, the threat of death is very important to keep readers engaged and to keep the right amount of tension in the story. Yeah, it's a shonen, so the likelihood of a main character dying is very slim, but you still need to keep that tension. And you can argue that bringing people back from the dead will decrease it. But the thing is, like most things in writing, everything lies on the execution of how you bring people back from the dead. You see, there are stories that simply bring characters back because they used to be popular when they were alive and the fans claim for them, and there's not a very good explanation. Yes, the writer can come up with something, but usually it feels very much out of nowhere, and that will certainly decrease the stakes in your story. But the Edo Tensei is simply not like that. First, because the Edo Tensei was set up from a very early point in the Naruto story. Unlike many things that come up later and weren't really set up in part 1, the Edo Tensei was first used in the Chunin exams by Orochimaru, and he brought back the first and second Hokages and even thought about and tried to bring Minato back as well. So in around chapter 120 of a 700 chapter story, we know that people can be brought back from the dead in this weird zombie-like appearance, and they can have their powers. So when it happens later in the war in a much greater capacity, we're not like, oh, okay, this came out of nowhere. Why is Kabuto bringing an army of people back? No, it makes sense. It clicks. Oh, yeah, right. He has Orochimaru's powers now, and Orochimaru could bring people back with Edo Tensei, so obviously Kabuto is gonna do that, creating an army that's extremely powerful. Also, bringing people back via Edo Tensei is not simply resurrecting a character that's going to be the character he used to be before. No, the Edo Tensei is going to be used by the enemy to fight against the main character, so it's a very different type of resurrection. It doesn't feel cheap because it makes the lives of the main characters much more difficult, especially because you can create so many interesting narrative moments. You can bring people from the dead that the main characters used to love, forcing them to fight against them, which is what Orochimaru did in the very first usage of the Edo Tensei. Hashirama and Tobirama were Hiruzen's mentors, so you can put the main characters in very difficult situations. You can also end arcs from characters that were brought back via Edo Tensei, which happens a lot in the War Arc, and you can use living characters to do so. There are so many interesting things you can do with it, and it's not as simple, oh, okay, let's bring the character back because he used to be popular. The Edo Tensei characters are going to serve a very different function in the narrative. They're going to be animes, even though they don't want to. The only exception to that is Itachi Uchiha, which, yeah, he may have been an Edo Tensei, but he freed himself from it, and he became one of the good guys. Which, you could say, would be kind of like bringing somebody back from the dead, and they're just gonna hang around with the characters again. However, Itachi's resurrection, quote-unquote, his breaking free of the Edo Tensei, was set up way before when he put a crow inside of Naruto's mouth. Well, that sounds a little weird. Anyway, because the setup was done way before it actually happened in the story, and before Itachi even died, instead of feeling cheap and reducing the stakes, the scene when Itachi releases himself from Edo Tensei is one of the most hype moments in the series, especially when it comes to the War Arc. And you see, the Edo Tensei army had to be a thing in the Naruto story for a very specific narrative reason. There simply weren't enough enemies for everybody to fight against. If you were to do a War Arc with only White Zetsus as the enemies and Obito, it would have been extremely boring. Yes, Obito could do some interesting things like he does in the original, but if there were no Edo Tenseis, fighting against an army of White Zetsus, essentially an army of red shirt / stormtroopers / fodder characters that we know are never gonna do anything special, would have been extremely monotonous, and it wouldn't have served to develop any characters fighting against them. Like, nobody cares about the White Zetsu fights in the War Arc. It's like a joke when Neji was caught by a White Zetsu. God, Neji, really? You're that weak? Because it's obvious the White Zetsus were supposed to fight against the other fodder characters from the Alliance. After all, the Alliance is 80,000 people. But for fights with emotional significance and resonance, you're going to need some more meaty characters. Preferably characters that have some sort of relationship with the main characters they're going to fight, so bringing people back from the dead that they used to know is a great idea, which was set up before, so it makes complete sense. And yeah, I guess you could say, well, you could just come up with new villains, like new guys that are going to join the Akatsuki or something like that, but that just wouldn't work. And also, if you want to give a fight to pretty much every main character there, you're gonna have to use a lot of villains. And imagine having to develop all these new villains in this single arc. It would have been impossible. I mean, some of the Edo Tensei, they have to be developed during the war arc itself because we didn't know them before. And those usually are the worst ones, like Ginkaku and Kinkaku. It's much better when we knew the characters before, so you don't need to do a complete new introduction. Other people will say, well, just don't end Naruto with a major war then, but no, Naruto had to end with a major war. First, because there was set up before of great wars in the past, which molded the personality and motivations of many important characters like Kakashi, so if the new generation, if our main characters didn't go through a war, the story would feel incomplete. Also, Naruto the story had to end with Naruto unifying the 5 major nations and essentially putting an end to the dysfunctional shinobi system that was in place since the beginning of the villages. And the only real way for you to do that is for you to have a war where the villages are going to be allies. Now, I've seen some people proposing other enemies for the Alliance to face, and an army of White Zetsus and Edo Tenseis, like an alliance of the smaller nations in the world, which you can argue would make some sense because the smaller nations were the ones who suffered the most throughout the other wars. It's the backstory of the Rain Village in Nagato, Yahiko, and Konan. The smaller villages served as battlefields for the more major nations because they were buffer states. So them rebelling against the 5 major nations would make some sense if you want to take the story that way, but from a world-building perspective, the military power of those smaller nations has to pale in comparison to the more major nations. Yeah, Obito could give them the tail beasts for them to fight against the more major nations, but still, it wouldn't work very well. And we're assuming here that Obito coerces the smaller nations to go against the 5 major ones. And with this smaller nation plot here, you are going to run into the same problem, having to develop completely new villains, which honestly you don't have much time for because a lot of things are going to happen in the middle of this war. Besides adding relationships we knew previously, finishing arcs of characters relating to characters they knew before, like for example Gaara and his dad, is much more cathartic and narratively interesting than creating new villains, be it from the smaller villages or new Akatsuki members. And because Naruto set up the characters can be revived with Edo Tensei so early on, it makes complete sense for the Edo Tensei Jutsu to be used in the war here. Financially speaking, it also makes sense for you to bring popular characters back because people want to see them and so they're going to read/watch your story more, which is going to bring you more money. And if you can do something that works financially for your story and narratively at the same time, that's the perfect world, isn't it? And the thing is, there are 2 types of stories. There are stories that bring people back from the dead, and there are stories that don't. If you are a story that doesn't bring people back from the dead, and all of a sudden you start bringing people back, that's gonna feel cheap and unearned. But if you set up early on that this is possible in your universe, then it narratively makes sense, and you can use it to enhance your story rather than take away from the stakes. So why do I say that the Naruto series, especially when it comes to the War Arc, needed more Edo Tensei summons? Well, one of the most usual and common complaints about the War Arc is that it is too short in universe. I've made an entire video about this, but the War Arc in universe in the Naruto series lasts for 2 days, about 48 hours. For this major war, the 4th great ninja war, to last only 48 hours, it doesn't make that much sense. It makes it feel like this event wasn't that impactful for the characters or the universe. I mean, if you had a cold that weekend the war arc happened and you didn't go to the battlefield because you weren't really 100% and you missed it, you know, just 2 days? Oh, I can't fight for 2 days, but guys, I'll be there on Monday. Oh no, actually the war is over. It's fine. I mean, if you didn't take one of the tail beast bombs Madara and Obito threw with the 10 tails in your head, you're gonna be completely fine if you didn't go to the war. You're not gonna feel that as a person in the Naruto universe. So that's a problem. That should have been fixed. The war should have lasted way longer in universe. And another issue is that many interesting characters did not get a whole lot of development development during the war itself. You can pretty much fix those two things, those two major problems with the war, with more Edo Tensei summons. If the main characters need to fight against more Edo Tensei, then yeah, the war is gonna be longer. You can make it longer in universe, and you can also give characters that got no development some development at least. And yes, I understand there will be objections to the stake I have. The first one being that this will make the Naruto story much longer, and that's true, but that's not necessarily a bad thing. People don't care if the story they are reading/watching is long. People only care about it if it is slow. If they realize the story is being dragged out just because, and things are not happening and things are not interesting yet, then they're going to complain about it, rightfully so. But if interesting things are happening, if the pacing is fast, I see no problem making Naruto 100, 200, maybe even 300 chapters longer. Make it reach 1,000 chapters. The second objection I see here is that people say already that the war arc is extremely messy and difficult to follow. So adding more Edo Tenseis, more fights, more characters in the alliance to have battles against the Edo Tensei would just make the story even more confusing. But this is more an anime problem than anything because of the amount of fillers they shove down our throats during the war arc. In the manga, the war arc is very easy to follow. There isn't much room for you to be confused because it's just very straightforward. It's not Donnie Darko or anything like that. And also it's obviously much shorter because of the lack of fillers. So adding more fights, adding even more in-universe time wouldn't make that a problem. Actually, splitting the war into more time in-universe would probably make it even more streamlined and easier to follow just because, you know, time is passing. You don't have this sense of unending progression that you have during the war arc because things are happening here and then you jump to another scene with other characters, which again is easy to follow. But if you split those things between days or weeks or even months in universe, that could be even easier to follow. So more characters should have been brought back via Edo Tensei. I can think of 4 major characters that weren't brought back that should have been. So let's talk about why they should have been Edo Tenseis in the war and why Kishimoto probably chose not to use them. Those characters are Shisui, Sakumo, Jiraiya, and Fugaku. Of course, you can come up with more characters than those, but those 4 are special. First, because they're all pretty popular within the fandom, so people would like to see them doing stuff. Shisui ranked 4th in the Naruto Top 99 poll, so extremely popular. People really wanted to see more about Shisui, especially because he pretty much gets no screen time. Sakumo ranked 7th, same thing with him. Barely any screen time and the guy was hyped up, you know, stronger than the Sonic and everything. Jiraiya ranked 12th. Obviously he had more screen time, but he's a fan favorite and people really wanted to see him back. And Fugaku ranked 28th, not as good as the others, but still pretty good, and he's a mysterious character we don't know much about, especially when it comes to his fighting potential. So let's go one by one. Talk about why Kishimoto didn't bring them back and why it would have been good to see them back. Starting with Shisui. When it comes to Shisui, and also Jiraiya, they are 2 characters Kabuto had to justify why he didn't bring back. You know, when he's explaining the Edo Tensei to Obito, he says, oh, I couldn't find Shisui's DNA anywhere and Jiraiya's body is too deep down the ocean, so it's too much pressure, it can't retrieve his DNA to use the Edo Tensei. And that's a little bit of lampshading. Kishimoto is pointing to the fact that he is not bringing those 2 characters back within the story itself to kind of justify it and say, yes, I'm aware I'm not bringing them back, guys, it's fine, it's gonna be okay, there's a reason for it. Now, in universe, it does make sense for you not to find Shisui's DNA. It is a difficult thing to find. After all, Shisui's body was lost. My headcanon, and I think this is pretty much confirmed, is that Itachi used Amaterasu to completely destroy his body. So the only vestiges we have of Shisui would be his eyes, one which Itachi possessed, the other Danzo possessed. So difficult to get it, I suppose. However, you could have simply said, yeah, no, Kabuto somehow got Shisui's DNA. Maybe he got it from Danzo's eye or something like that. You could have done it. The actual reason as to why Shisui was not returned as an Edo Tensei was because he would be problematic from a mechanical standpoint. Because the Koto Matsukami Jutsu is a mess and also overpowered. When Danzo is using it, it feels like it's easy to be broken out of. Mifune is broken out of by being told he was under a genjutsu under Koto Matsukami and controlled by Danzo, so that was fine. But when it comes to Itachi using it, he completely rewrote out the Edo Tensei command and commanded himself to protect the Leaf Village, meaning he was going to go after Kabuto to deactivate the Edo Tensei. And that could not be broken out of because Itachi was aware he was under the Genjutsu. So it feels like the two versions of Kotomatsu Kami are completely different depending on the eye that uses them. And yeah, Itachi's version would have certainly been a problem narratively and mechanically speaking because it would have given Kabuto way too much power. Imagine if he uses that jutsu against a very powerful, important member of the Alliance like Tsunade or Inoki or the Raikage or Gaara or even Naruto, I don't know. It would have been incredibly broken. The other version of Kotomatsu Kami you can certainly write ways to counter, so it wouldn't have been that much of a problem. Now there's a very easy way for you to solve this, it's just to nerf Edo Shisui and say he cannot use a stronger version of Kotomatsu Kami, like many characters cannot use certain abilities they have as Edo Tenseis. Madara cannot use Limbo, for example, so you can just justify that because the Edo Tensei body is not 100% of the power of the original, he simply could not use Kotomatsu Kami because the stronger version of Kotomatsu Kami demands too much chakra and power from the user, something you cannot achieve with the Edo Tensei body. And Shisui would have been an interesting character to see in the war. First because he looks pretty cool, and we think the way he fought should have been pretty cool as well. The video game version is pretty cool too. He would have had a Susanoo, probably, and you could have given him some very interesting fights. Just nerf Kotomatsu Kami, you're completely fine. Now, when it comes to Jiraiya, the story is a little bit different. Because, yeah, Shisui's a character we don't necessarily care too much about because we haven't seen him very much. We're more curious than anything. That's why people wanted to see Shisui as an Edo or even at all. But when it comes to Jiraiya, he's a beloved character we know a lot about. He's also a character that went through a complete arc while he was alive. Unlike Shisui, for example, which you could easily give an arc to as an Edo Tensei. No, Jiraiya is different. Also because his death was so impactful, so Kishimoto may have been worried that bringing him back would diminish the effect of his death. But actually, I would argue that Jiraiya coming back and seeing Naruto again and having to fight against Naruto would just make his death even more tragic and his relationship with Naruto even better and more interesting. I mean, obviously, if Jiraiya was brought back, he would have to fight Naruto, right? It's obvious. There wouldn't be anybody else for him to fight against. Maybe Tsunade, but he would have to fight both of them. Naruto would have been the #1 character Edo Jiraiya would have to fight. You could have done some very interesting things. You could have shown Jiraiya Naruto's development, you could have shown Jiraiya how Naruto changed the world around him, and you could have the satisfactory moment when Jiraiya realizes he was right about Naruto being the child of prophecy that was set up in the Pain arc. The only reason why Kishimoto didn't bring Jiraiya back was because he probably thought his death was too sacred to bring him back. And also because Jiraiya went through a complete character arc when he was alive. He finished his character arc as he was plummeting into the depths of the ocean. Unlike Itachi, for example, who also had a very remarkable and impactful death, but certainly did not go through his entire character arc when he was alive. Itachi actually needed more development as an Edo Tensei. But still, you could have done some very interesting things with Edo Jiraiya, and the excuse of couldn't go down the ocean to retrieve Jiraiya's body is bogus. Come on, #1, you're a ninja, you should be able to handle high pressure physically, and also you can use jutsus to circumvent that? Like, is this really your #1 excuse? Oh, he's too deep into the ocean, I cannot reach his body. No, come on, you're a ninja, you can use jutsus, you're a powerful shinobi, you have Sage Mode, Kabuto. Also, remember what happened before Jiraiya died? He was fighting against pain in the Rain Village, he was bleeding everywhere, leaving traces of his DNA all around the Rain Village. Now you can say because it's the Rain Village, the rain would have wiped the blood away, which is true when it's outside, but Jiraiya also bled inside of those buildings in the Leaf Village. And also, remember a jutsu Jiraiya used against pain? The hair needle jutsu? A jutsu he literally uses his hair as weapons to attack, detaching his hair from himself and throwing them against the enemy as needles. And hair, if you don't know, carries your DNA, so Kabuto could just use the hair as Jiraiya's DNA to use Jiraiya as Edo Tensei? You know, if there's no blood, if the rain wiped the blood away? Like, come on, really? Really? Kabuto found Madara's DNA who knows how? You know, Madara died as a very old man in that cave and nobody knew he existed. How did Kabuto find his DNA? He had to have done some intense research, so doing the same thing for Jiraiya would have been so much easier. It was a poor excuse. Jiraiya should have been brought back via Edo Tensei. Moving on to Sakumo. He was a character that was set up as extremely powerful with a very tragic backstory and very much related to Kakashi. And because he was set up as this strong character, it would make sense for you to pay off and show us how he fought. Give us a glimpse of his strength. Doing that in the War Arc would have been perfect. People also seem to care a lot about the character, especially because he's very much related to Kakashi, and he looks pretty cool too. Now, we don't know where he was buried, but probably somewhere in the Leaf Village, so it wouldn't have been very difficult for Kabuto to acquire some of his DNA. I mean, if he got DNA for somebody like Asuma, who was also buried in Leaf Village, I don't see why he wouldn't be able to get it from Sakumo. But the reason why Sakumo is not brought back to the war is because, well, he was kinda brought back in the Pain Arc when Kakashi dies and he sees his dad in limbo and everything. They have a conversation, and that conversation pretty much finishes Sakumo's character arc, because he confesses what he did to Kakashi, Kakashi forgives him, we have a nice moment, and that's it. Bringing him back in the work would have been kinda pointless because the character has already reached what he had to do in the story. So the very easy solution for that is to simply scrap that scene from the Pain Arc and do it in the War Arc instead. However, instead of it being in limbo, it's Kakashi fighting against his undead Edo Tensei father, which, if you ask me, would have been more interesting to see than a conversation around a campfire in limbo. But yeah, because they happened in the Pain Arc, bringing Sakumo back would have just been kind of fan servicey because, oh, we want to see how he fights, but it wouldn't have added too much to the story because the character Sakumo needs to fight in the War Arc if he was brought back as Edo Tensei is obviously Kakashi. There's no going around it. You're not gonna give like Shino a fight against Sakumo. You have to give it to Kakashi. When it comes to Fugaku, it's also kind of baffling seeing that Kabuto did not bring him back as an Edo Tensei, because I have to assume he was also buried in the Leaf Village, and he was an extremely powerful, famous ninja when he was alive. The leader of the Uchiha clan, Wicked Eye Fugaku. So it's just one of those, yeah, no, Kabuto just kind of forgot about him, I suppose, but he remembered Hanzo and Ginkaku and Kinkaku, bro! But yeah, there are narrative reasons as to why Kishimoto wouldn't want to bring Fugaku back, because the obvious fight Fugaku needs to get is a fight against Sasuke, if he was to be brought back as Edo Tensei. However, Sasuke is going to have his fight alongside Itachi, and that's when Sasuke is going to get the most developments regarding the Edo Tensei and everything else. And if you did a fight between Sasuke and Fugaku before you get the Itachi and Sasuke versus Kabuto fight, you're going to prematurely do some of that development, because the fight of Itachi and Sasuke versus Kabuto ends with Itachi showing Sasuke the whole truth. If Sasuke fought against Fugaku before that, he would have already known the whole truth, because Fugaku would have obviously told him about it. And bringing Fugaku back and not making him fight against Sasuke so this problem wouldn't happen simply doesn't make any sense. Also, because Sasuke was not involved in the war for the great majority of the Edo Tensei period, it means that there wasn't much of an opportunity for Sasuke to fight against a hypothetical Edo Fugaku, but this could have been easily solved if the war didn't last for only 2 days in universe. I can also think about Hikaku Uchiha as Edo Tensei, the solo king, but if he was brought back, he would have soloed the entire alliance, so obviously he couldn't do that. I'm joking. He would have soloed the entire universe. Watch this video right here for more cool Naruto content. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and ring notifications. It takes 5 seconds for you to do those things, and they're really helpful, so please do them. And thank you so much for watching.